The autumn wind carried the scent of dying leaves across the Montana frontier as 5-year-old Emma Sullivan clutched her most precious possession, a wooden doll her father had carved for her last Christmas. The doll's painted blue eyes seemed to mirror Emma's own as she sat on the porch steps of their modest homestead, watching the world through curious, innocent eyes. Her father, Thomas Sullivan, worked tirelessly in the fields beyond their small cabin, his weathered hands coaxing life from the stubborn prairie soil. Her mother, Mary, hummed softly while hanging laundry on the line, her voice carrying melodies that spoke of dreams deferred but never abandoned. It was on this crisp October morning that Emma first heard the crying. The sound drifted from the edge of their property, where the prairie grass grew tall and golden. Emma's small feet carried her toward the sound without hesitation, her heart already reaching out to whatever soul was in pain. There, beneath the spreading branches of a lone cottonwood tree, sat a girl about her own age. The girl's dark hair fell in braids down her back, and her clothing spoke of a different world, buckskin and beadwork that caught the morning light like scattered stars. Her copper skin was streaked with tears, and her small shoulders shook with each sob. Emma approached slowly, the way her father had taught her to approach wounded animals. "Why are you crying?" she asked in her small, clear voice. The native girl looked up, startled. Her dark eyes were wide with fear and sorrow. She spoke words Emma couldn't understand, but the universal language of a child's distress needed no translation. Without a moment's hesitation, Emma held out her wooden doll. "Here," she said simply. "This always makes me feel better when I'm sad." The girl's tears slowed as she looked at the offered toy. Tentatively, she reached out and took it, holding it as if it were made of the most delicate glass. A small smile broke through her tears like sunshine through storm clouds. Emma sat down beside her new friend, and though they couldn't speak each other's language, they spent the morning in the companionship that only children can share, pointing at clouds, making faces, and laughing at nothing and everything. When the sun reached its peak, the native girl stood to leave. She tried to return the doll, but Emma shook her head firmly. "Keep it," she said, pressing it back into the girl's hands. "Friends share." The girl hugged the doll to her chest, spoke words that sounded like gratitude in any language, and disappeared into the tall grass like a whisper on the wind. Emma returned home with grass stains on her dress and joy in her heart. Couldn't quite explain to her parents where her beloved doll had gone. She simply said she'd given it to someone who needed it more. Chapter 2. The elder's wisdom the next morning brought visitors to the Sullivan homestead, visitors unlike any they had ever received. A small group of native elders approached on horseback, their weathered faces speaking of wisdom earned through countless seasons on the prairie. Behind them rode a younger man, tall and straight in his saddle, the eyes as dark as midnight, and a presence that seemed to command the very wind. Thomas Sullivan stepped out onto the porch, his rifle within reach, but his hands open and empty. Mary emerged beside him, instinctively placing herself between the approaching riders and the cabin where Emma played inside. The lead elder dismounted with the fluid grace of one who had spent a lifetime on horseback. He was ancient, his face mapped with lines that told stories of joy and sorrow, victory and loss. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of years and the authority of leadership. "We come in peace," he said in carefully pronounced English. "We seek the child of this house." Thomas felt his blood run cold. "What business do you have with my daughter?" The elder's eyes softened slightly. "Your daughter showed kindness to one of our own yesterday. Ayana, the granddaughter of our chief, was lost and crying. Your child gave her comfort and a gift from her own heart." Mary stepped forward, her maternal instincts overriding her fear. "Is the little girl all right?" "We were worried when Emma came home with stories of a crying child. She is well, thanks to your daughter's kindness." The elder gestured to one of the younger men, who dismounted and approached carrying a beautifully crafted bundle. "Among our people, kindness must be met with kindness. A gift demands a gift in return." The young man who had caught Mary's attention stepped forward. His name was Joseph Crowfeather, and he moved with the quiet confidence of a warrior, and the gentle strength of a natural leader. As he unwrapped the bundle, Mary found herself studying his face, the strong jawline, the intelligent eyes. The way he handled the precious contents with reverence. Inside the wrapping was a doll unlike anything the Sullivans had ever seen. It was crafted from the softest doeskin, with intricate beadwork that told stories in patterns of blue and white and gold. The doll's face was painted with delicate precision, and its clothing was a miniature masterpiece of native artistry. This was made by Ayana's grandmother, the elder explained. She worked through the night to create something worthy of your daughter's generosity. Please let the child know that her kindness has not been forgotten. Thomas felt his prejudices, warring with his sense of honor. These were good people, he realized. Whatever stories he'd heard about savage Indians, these elders before him spoke of honor and gratitude. Emma, he called. Come out here, sweetheart. The little girl bounded out of the cabin, her blonde curls catching the morning light. When she saw the magnificent doll, her eyes went wide with wonder. She approached the elders with the fearless curiosity of childhood. Is this for me? She whispered. The elder smiled, and his weathered face transformed with gentle warmth. Is a gift from one heart to another. Ayana wanted you to know that your kindness saved her from more than tears yesterday. She was lost and afraid, far from home. Your gift reminded her that kindness exists in this world. Emma accepted the doll with the solemnity of a child who understands something important is happening, even if she can't quite grasp what it is. Joseph Crowfeather watched the exchange with something stirring in his chest. There was something about Mary Sullivan, the way she protected her child while still showing openness to strangers. The strength in her stance, the kindness in her eyes. When she looked at him, he felt something he had never experienced before, something that made his heart beat differently. We hope this brings peace between our peoples, the elder said to Thomas. Your daughter has planted a seed of friendship. That could grow into something beautiful. As the group prepared to leave, Joseph caught Mary's eye one last time. In that moment, both felt the spark of something that would change their lives forever, though. Neither could have predicted the trials and heartbreak that lay ahead. Chapter 3. Seeds of Love, the Seasons Turned. And with them, the unexpected friendship between the Sullivan family and the nearby native tribe grew stronger. The elders had been true to their word. They wanted peace, and they found in Thomas and Mary kindred spirits who valued honor and hard work above the color of skin or the customs of birth. Joseph Crowfeather became a regular visitor to the Sullivan homestead, ostensibly to trade horses and discuss the movements of less friendly tribes in the area. But Mary knew, and Joseph knew, that his visits had little to do with horses, and everything to do with the growing attraction that neither could deny. Mary was 22. Married young to Thomas when she was barely 18. Thomas was a good man, steady, reliable, hardworking.
Yes.
He provided for his family and loved Emma with the fierce protectiveness of a father. But the marriage had been one of practicality rather than passion, arranged by their families back in Missouri before they'd made the journey west. Joseph was 25, unmarried by choice. He had been expected to take a wife from among his own people, but he had always felt called to something different, something more. When he looked at Mary, he saw not just beauty, though she was beautiful, with her auburn hair that caught fire in the sunlight and her eyes the color of prairie grass, but a kindness that matched his own, strength that called to his warrior's heart. Their first real conversation happened on a warm spring day when Joseph arrived to find Thomas away in town. Mary was hanging laundry while Emma played nearby with both her dolls, the carved wooden one returned by Ayana and the beautiful beaded one given by the elders. Your husband is not here, Joseph observed, dismounting from his horse. He's gone. To town for supplies, Mary replied, not looking at him directly. The propriety of the situation wasn't lost on her, but she made no move to send him away. Perhaps I should return another time. Perhaps you should. But she said it with a smile that invited him to stay. They talked for hours that day about the land, about their childhoods, about dreams and hopes and the weight of expectations. Joseph told her about his vision quest, the spiritual journey, that had shown him his path as a bridge between worlds. Mary spoke of her longing for adventure, for a love that set her soul on fire rather than simply providing comfort and security. "I should not be telling you these things," Mary said, as the afternoon shadows grew long. "And I should not be listening," Joseph replied. "But some truths demand to be spoken, even when they bring danger." That was how it began, with truth spoken. In the space between worlds, between duty and desire, between the life Mary had and the life she dreamed of. Through the summer and into the fall, Joseph's visits became more frequent. He taught Emma to braid her hair in the native style, showed her how to track animals by their prints, and told her stories of the old days when buffalo covered the plains, like a living carpet. But it was Mary who drew him back, again and again. They would walk along the creek that bordered the Sullivan property, always careful to stay within sight of the cabin, always maintaining the facade of propriety. But anyone with eyes could see the way they looked at each other, the way their hands almost touched when he helped her over the stepping stones, the way their conversations flowed like water finding its natural course. "This is wrong," Mary said. One autumn evening, as they sat on the creek bank, Emma playing between them with her dolls, "Love is never wrong," Joseph replied quietly. "It may be difficult, it may be dangerous, but it is never wrong. I married Joseph. I made vows. To a man who sees you as a possession rather than a partner?" When was the last time Thomas looked at you the way you deserve to be looked at? When did he last ask about your dreams, your hopes, your heart? Mary's silence was answer enough. Thomas was not cruel, but he was distant. He worked hard, provided well, and expected nothing more from marriage than a clean house, regular meals, and a wife who didn't cause trouble. He loved Emma, but he seemed to view Mary as simply part of the household, like the stove or the plow, useful, necessary, but not particularly worthy of attention. "What are you suggesting?" Mary asked, though her heart already knew the answer. "Come with me," Joseph said simply. "You and Emma, my people would welcome you. We could make a life together, a real life built on love rather than obligation." Offer hung between them like a bridge across an impossible chasm. Mary's heart soared at the possibility, but her practical mind saw all the obstacles. Thomas would never let Emma go. He'd hunt us down.
"And your people, would they really accept a white woman?"
"Some would object," Joseph admitted. "But my grandmother is the chief's sister. She has already spoken to me about you. She says, sees something in your spirit, something that belongs with us." And what about Emma? She'd be torn between two worlds, never fully belonging to either. "She already lives between worlds," Joseph pointed out. "Look at how she plays with both dolls, how she speaks the few words of our language I've taught her. Some people are meant to be bridges, Mary. Perhaps Emma is one of them." That night, Mary lay awake beside her sleeping husband, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with her heart. She loved Joseph Shea, could no longer deny it. The thought of him made her pulse quicken and her breath catch. When he looked at her, she felt beautiful, cherished, truly seen for the first time in her life. But leaving would mean abandoning everything she'd ever known, putting Emma in potential danger, and betraying the vows she'd made before God and her community. It would mean becoming an outcast from her own people, with no guarantee that Joseph's tribe would truly accept her. As winter approached, the weight of the decision pressed down on her like the gray sky that promised snow. Chapter 5. The Breaking. Point the crisis came on a bitter February morning when Thomas discovered Joseph and Mary in what appeared to be an intimate conversation by the creek. In reality, they had been discussing Mary's growing internal turmoil. She had finally decided to leave with Joseph when spring came. But she was terrified of the consequences. Thomas had returned early from a hunting trip to find his wife missing. From the cabin, and Emma playing alone, following Mary's tracks in the snow, he'd found her standing close to the Indian man he'd trusted, their heads bent together in what looked like a lover's whisper. "Get away from my wife," Thomas roared, his rifle already in his hands. Joseph stepped back immediately, his hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Thomas, we were only talking. I've seen how you talk to her," Thomas spat. "I've seen the way you look at each other. Did you think I was blind?" Mary moved between the two men, her heart pounding with fear. "Thomas, please, put down the gun." "So, you can run off with your Indian lover?" Thomas's face was red with rage and humiliation. "I've given you everything, Mary. A home, security, a good life. And this is how you repay me?" "You've given me a roof and regular meals?" Mary shot back, her own anger finally breaking free. "But you've never given me your heart, Thomas. You married me because you needed a wife, not because you loved me." "Love?" Thomas laughed bitterly. "Love is what puts food on the table and keeps the roof from leaking. Love is what makes a man work himself to the bone for his family. But I guess that's not enough for you." Joseph stepped forward, his voice calm but firm. "Thomas, I understand your anger, but Mary deserves to be happy. You both do. This arrangement benefits no one." "Don't you dare tell me about my own marriage," Thomas snarled, swinging the rifle. Toward Joseph. "You think you can just waltz in here and steal my wife, my daughter?" "I've stolen nothing that wasn't already lost," Joseph replied quietly. The words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Saw the truth in Mary's eyes, the way she instinctively moved closer to Joseph even in the face of danger. Everything he'd worked for, everything he'd built, was crumbling around him. "Get off my land," he said finally, his voice deadly quiet. "And if I ever see you near my family again, I'll shoot you down like a rabid dog." Joseph looked at Mary one last time, his eyes full of regret and love. "The offer stands," he said quietly.
"Oh."
"When you're ready." As Joseph rode away, Mary felt her heart breaking. Thomas grabbed her arm roughly, his fingers digging into her flesh. "You're my wife," he said through clenched teeth. "You'll start acting like it, or so help me. I'll make you regret the day you were born." That night, for the first time in their marriage, Thomas locked the cabin door and took the key to bed with him. Chapter 6. Captive Hearts. The winter that followed was the longest of Mary's life. Thomas watched her constantly, rarely allowing her out of his sight. He hired a neighbor boy to help with the outside work so he could stay closer to home. His eyes always on Mary as she went about her daily tasks. Emma sensed the tension in the house, the way her parents no longer spoke, except when necessary, the way her mother's eyes had lost their light. The little girl missed Joseph's visits, missed the stories and laughter he had brought to their home. "Where is Joseph?" Emma asked one day as she played with her dolls. "He won't be coming anymore," Mary said quietly, her heart aching at the disappointment in her daughter's face. "Did he do something bad?" "No, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups have to make difficult choices, and those choices mean people can't see each other anymore. But I miss him, and I think you miss him too, Mama." Mary knelt down and gathered her daughter into her arms. "Sometimes we miss people, very much, but we have to be strong and make the best of things." But as the weeks turned to months, Mary felt her strength ebbing away. Thomas's controlling behavior grew worse. He accompanied her to town, stood over her while she tended the garden and questioned her every movement. He wasn't physically violent, but his constant surveillance felt like a prison. Meanwhile, unknown to the Sullivans, Joseph was fighting his own battles. His feelings for Mary had put him at odds with some members of his tribe, who felt he was betraying his people by pursuing a white woman. The tribal council had met several times to discuss the situation, with some calling for Joseph to be banished if he continued his pursuit of the married white woman. Joseph's grandmother, though the wise woman who had first approved of Mary, defended him in council. "Love sees no color," she argued. "If this woman's heart calls to our warrior, perhaps it is because the spirits intend for her to join our people." But others disagreed. "She is married to another," they said. "Would you have us become thieves of wives? What honor is there in such love?" Joseph found himself torn between his love for Mary and his loyalty to his people. As spring approached, he made a decision that would change everything. Chapter 7. The Desperate Plan. In a warm May morning, nearly 3 months after Thomas had banished Joseph from their land, Mary received an unexpected visitor. Emma was playing in the garden when a young native woman approached on foot. Moving quietly through the tall grass, Mary recognized her immediately was Ayanna. Now 8 years old and beautiful, still carrying the wooden doll Emma had given her years before. "Ayanna?" Mary called softly, glancing toward the field where Thomas was working. The girl approached cautiously. "Mary Sullivan," she said in careful English. "I am message from Joseph Crowfeather." Mary's heart began to race. What message? Ayanna glanced around nervously before pulling a small piece of birch bark from her dress. On it, Joseph had drawn symbols that Mary had learned to read, a simple pictographic language he had taught her during their walks by the creek. The message was brief but clear. "Tonight, when the moon is highest, the old oak by the creek, come alone. Last chance." Mary stared at the message, her hands trembling. She knew what Joseph was offering, one final opportunity to leave with him. If she didn't come tonight, he would respect her choice and disappear from her life forever. "Tell him," Mary began, then stopped. She couldn't send a message back through a child. "Tell him you delivered his message." Ayanna nodded and melted back into the prairie grass as silently as she had come. Mary spent the day in a state of nervous agitation. This was her moment of decision, perhaps her last chance at true happiness. But the risks were enormous. If Thomas caught her, there was no telling what he might do. And taking Emma into the wilderness, away from everything she'd ever known, was a gamble with her daughter's future. That evening, Mary went through her normal routine with unusual care. She prepared Thomas's favorite dinner, helped Emma with her bedtime prayers, and made sure everything in the cabin was perfect. If this was to be her last night as Thomas Sullivan's wife, she wanted to leave no task undone. Thomas seemed to sense something different about her behavior, but attributed it to the improving weather and the arrival of spring. He even smiled at her over dinner, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in months. "You seem happier tonight," he observed. "Spring always lifts my spirits," Mary replied, the lie bitter on her tongue. After Thomas fell asleep, Mary lay still for what felt like hours, listening to his breathing, watching the shadows move across the ceiling. When she was certain he was deep in slumber, she slipped carefully from the bed and gathered her sleeping daughter into her arms. Emma stirred but didn't wake as Mary carried her to the door. Mary's hand trembled as she reached for the handle, knowing that once she stepped through that door, it would be no going back. Chapter 8. Moon-kissed destiny. The night was clear and bright, the full moon casting silver light across the prairie. Mary moved as quietly as possible, carrying Emma through the tall grass toward the old oak tree by the creek. Every step felt momentous, each footfall a choice between her old life and her new one. Joseph was waiting beneath the tree, his horse standing patiently beside him. When he saw Mary approaching with Emma in her arms, his face lit up with hope and relief. "You came," he whispered as she approached. "I couldn't live another day as Thomas's prisoner," Mary replied quietly, settling Emma on her feet. The little girl was awake now, looking around with sleepy confusion. "Are we going on an adventure, Mama?" Emma asked. "Yes, sweetheart. The biggest adventure of our lives." Joseph knelt down to Emma's level. "Do you remember the stories I told you about my people, little one? About how we live under the stars and follow the seasons?" Emma nodded solemnly. "Are we going to live with your people? If you want to. But it will be very different from the life you've known. Are you brave enough for such a journey?" Emma looked between her mother and Joseph, her young mind processing the magnitude of what was happening. Finally, she nodded. "If Mama wants to go, then I want to go too." Joseph's heart swelled with love for this brave little girl who had first brought him into Mary's life with her simple act of kindness. "Then we must hurry," he said, lifting Emma onto his horse.
We have a long ride ahead of us, and your father."
"We'll discover you're gone when morning comes." Mary climbed up behind Emma, her arms encircling her daughter as Joseph mounted in front of them. As the horse began to move, Mary looked back one last time at the cabin that had been her home for 5 years. She felt a pang of guilt for leaving Thomas this way, but she knew he would never have let her go willingly. They rode through the night, following paths that Joseph knew by heart, moving steadily away from the Sullivan homestead and toward the territory where his people made their seasonal camp. Mary felt a mixture of fear and exhilaration coursing through her veins. She was finally free, finally following her heart. But the consequences of her choice would ripple outward in ways she couldn't yet imagine. As dawn broke over the prairie, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. They crested a hill and saw the native encampment spread out below them, dozens of tipis arranged in careful patterns, smoke rising from cooking fires, people beginning their daily activities. "Welcome to your new life," Joseph said softly. But even as Mary's heart soared with hope, neither she nor Joseph could have predicted the challenges that lay ahead, or the price they would both pay for their forbidden love. Chapter 9. The Reckoning. Thomas Sullivan woke to an empty bed and a house that felt too quiet. At first, he assumed Mary had risen early to tend to Emma or start breakfast. But when he called her name and received no answer, a cold dread began to settle in his stomach. He found Emma's bed empty, her few precious belongings gone. Mary's Sunday dress was missing from its peg, along with her mother's locket and the small sewing kit that had been her grandmother's. They hadn't just left, they had fled. Thomas's roar of rage and anguish echoed across the prairie as he realized what had happened. His wife and daughter were gone, taken by the Indian he had trusted, the man he had welcomed into his home. Within hours, Thomas was in town, gathering a posse of men who shared his fury at what they saw as an unforgivable crime. In their minds, Mary and Emma hadn't left willingly. They had been kidnapped by a savage, and it was their duty as civilized men to rescue them. "We'll track them down and bring them back," declared Sheriff Morrison, a hard man who had fought in the Indian Wars and bore the scars to prove it. "We'll make sure that Red Devil pays for what he's done." Thomas provided horses and supplies, his face set in grim determination. He would bring his family home, no matter what it took. Meanwhile, at the native encampment, Mary was beginning to understand the complexity of her new situation. While Joseph's grandmother and several of the elders welcomed her with genuine warmth, others viewed her arrival with suspicion and barely concealed hostility. "She brings trouble," muttered one of the warriors. "The white men will come looking for her, and we will all suffer for this foolishness." Joseph's grandmother, whose name was Singing Bird, took Mary under her protective wing, provided Mary and Emma with their own tipi, and began teaching Mary the skills she would need to survive in this new world: how to prepare traditional foods, how to tan hides, how to read the signs of weather and season. Emma adapted more quickly than Mary had dared hope. The children of the tribe accepted her easily, fascinated by her blonde hair and blue eyes, but treating her as one of their own. She learned to speak their language with the quick facility of childhood and seemed to thrive in the outdoor life. But Mary struggled with doubt. Had she made the right choice? Was she being selfish, pursuing her own happiness at the expense of Emma's security? The worried looks of some tribe members reminded her daily that her presence put everyone at risk. Joseph sensed her internal turmoil and tried to reassure her. "Love requires courage," he told her one evening as they walked along the river that ran near the camp. "You showed that courage by coming here." "But at what cost?" Mary replied. "Thomas will come looking for us. He'll bring others with him. People could be hurt because of my choices." "People are already hurt by choices made long ago," Joseph said quietly. "The choice to see my people as enemies instead of neighbors. The choice to claim this land as if it belonged to no one. The choice to build walls between hearts instead of bridges. Your courage to choose love over fear is not the problem, Mary. It's part of the solution." But even as he spoke these words, Joseph knew that trouble was indeed coming. His scouts had already reported the approach of white men, armed and angry, following their trail. Chapter 10. When worlds collide, the confrontation came on a sweltering July morning when Thomas and his posse rode into the native camp with guns drawn and faces set like stone. The tribe's warriors responded immediately, forming a protective circle around the women and children, but Joseph raised his hand to prevent bloodshed. "Thomas Sullivan," Joseph called out, stepping forward with his own hands visible and empty. "You come to our peaceful camp with weapons drawn. This is not the way of honorable men." "Don't talk to me about honor, you thieving savage," Thomas spat. "You stole my wife and daughter. I've come to take them home." Mary emerged from behind the circle of warriors, her chin raised defiantly, despite the fear in her eyes. She had known this moment would come. But she was still unprepared for the pain she saw in Thomas's face. Not just anger, but genuine hurt in bewilderment. "I wasn't stolen, Thomas," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the tense silence. "I left of my own free will." "That's impossible," Sheriff Morrison interjected. "No white woman would choose to live with savages unless she was forced or threatened." "Then you don't know me very well," Mary replied, her anger flaring at the insult to people who had shown her nothing but kindness. Emma appeared beside her mother, her small hand slipping into Mary's. The sight of his daughter, tanned from the sun, dressed in native clothing, speaking words in a language he didn't understand, to the children behind her, hit Thomas like a physical blow. "Emma," he said, his voice breaking. "Come to Papa, sweetheart. We're going home." Emma looked up at her mother, confusion and fear in her young eyes. She barely remembered the man who claimed to be her father, this angry stranger with the harsh voice and hostile demeanor. "I don't want to go," she said quietly. "I like it here. Everyone is kind to me." Thomas felt his world crumbling around him. His own daughter didn't want to come home with him. The woman he had married, the life he had built, everything he had worked for was slipping away like sand through his fingers. "This ends now," Sheriff Morrison declared, raising his rifle. "We're taking the woman and child, and we're burning this nest of thieves to the ground." "No." Mary stepped forward, placing herself between the armed white men and the tribe that had sheltered her. "These people have done nothing wrong. If you want to punish someone, punish me, the one who chose to leave." Joseph moved to stand beside Mary, his presence a silent declaration of his willingness to die for the woman he loved. Around them, the warriors of the tribe tensed, ready for battle, despite being outnumbered and outgunned. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring, violence hanging in the air like thunder before a storm. One wrong word, one sudden movement, and blood would flow across the prairie grass. It was Singing Bird who broke the tension, stepping forward with the authority of her years and wisdom. She spoke first in her own language, then in careful English. "Enough," she said firmly. "This is not the way. Violence will solve nothing and honor no one." She looked directly at Thomas, her ancient eyes holding depths of understanding that made him shift uncomfortably. "You have lost your woman, white man. You lost her long before she came to us. A heart cannot be owned like a horse or a plot of land. It must be won anew each day, tended like a garden, cherished like water in the desert." Thomas felt the truth of her words like a knife in his chest. He had taken Mary for granted, treated her as a piece of property rather than a partner. Acknowledging his mistakes didn't make losing her any easier. "She's still my wife," he said, his voice hollow with defeat. "Emma is still my daughter. They always will be," Singing Bird replied gently. "But they are also their own people, with their own hearts and their own choices to make. Would you cage a bird and call it love? Would you chain the wind and call it yours?" Sheriff Morrison stepped forward impatiently. "Enough philosophy, old woman. We're taking them back, and that's final." But Thomas raised his hand to stop him. Looking at Marie, really looking at her for the first time in years, he saw something he had missed before. She was glowing with a happiness and vitality he had never seen in their marriage. Her eyes, which had grown dull and distant in their cabin, now sparkled with life and purpose. "Are you truly happy here?" he asked quietly. Mary met his gaze steadily. "Happier than I've ever been in my life. And Emma? Look at her, Thomas. Really look at her. When was the last time you saw her? Laugh the way she laughs here. When did she last run to you with stories and excitement the way she runs to Joseph?" Thomas looked at his daughter, seeing her as if for the first time. Emma stood confidently beside Mary, no longer the quiet, sometimes fearful child who had tiptoed around the tension in their cabin. Here she was vibrant and bold, secure in the love and acceptance surrounding her. The fight went out of Thomas all at once, leaving him feeling empty and defeated. He had lost his family, but perhaps he had never truly had them to begin with. Chapter 11. The Price of Love I Could Force. "You two come back," Thomas said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have the law on my side, and enough men with guns to make it happen." "Yes," Mary replied simply. "You could. But would that bring you happiness, Thomas? Would forcing me to return make you love you?" The question hung in the air between them, and Thomas knew the answer. A marriage built on force and resentment would be no marriage. At all, it would be a prison for all of them. Sheriff Morrison was growing impatient with what he saw as weakness. Sullivan, stop letting your emotions cloud your judgment. These savages have stolen your property. You came here to take it back. They're not property, Thomas said quietly, never taking his eyes off Mary. They're people, and people have to choose their own path. The words cost him everything he thought he wanted, but speaking them felt like the first honest thing he had done in years. Joseph stepped forward, his respect for Thomas evident in his posture. You are a man of honor, Thomas Sullivan. Your daughter will always know that her father chose her happiness over his own pride. Will I be able to see Emma as she grows up?
Mary felt tears prick her eyes at the pain in Thomas's voice.
For all his faults, he did love Emma in his own way. Of course, she's your daughter, Thomas. Nothing can change that. Sheriff Morrison and several of the other men grumbled their displeasure, but they couldn't force Thomas to pursue a course of action he had abandoned. Gradually, the posses dispersed, riding back toward town with dark mutterings about the madness that came from living too long on the frontier. But Thomas lingered. Looking at the life his wife and daughter had chosen, saw Emma playing with native children, chattering happily in their language. He saw Mary working alongside the other women, her movements confident and purposeful in a way they had never been in his kitchen. I should have been a better husband, he said finally. We were both young when we married, Mary replied gently. We both did the best we knew how with what we had then. But people grow, Thomas. People change. The person I am now needs different things than the girl you married. And Joseph gives you those things? Mary looked at the man she loved, standing patient and strong beside her. Joseph sees me, Thomas. He sees who I really am, not just who he needs me to be, and I see him the same way. That's what love should be to people, choosing each other. Every day, not out of obligation, but out of joy. Thomas nodded slowly, understanding finally dawning in his eyes. He had loved the idea of Mary, the role she played in his life, but he had never truly loved the woman herself. That realization hurt, but it also brought a strange kind of peace. Take care of them, he said to Joseph, extending his hand. Joseph grasped it firmly. With my life. As Thomas rode away alone, Mary felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and hope. She had won her freedom, but at great cost to a man who, despite his flaws, tried to build a life with her. Chapter 12. Building new dreams, the seasons that followed brought both challenges and joys, as Mary and Emma fully integrated into their new life. Mary learned to speak the tribal language fluently, mastered the skills of traditional crafts, and found her place in the complex social structure of the community. More importantly, she found her voice, something she had lost during her years of marriage to Thomas. Emma flourished like a wildflower after rain. She grew tall and strong, equally comfortable in both worlds, able to speak English with the same fluency as her adopted tribal language. She became a bridge between cultures, helping to translate not just words but understanding between different groups of people who encountered the tribe. Joseph and Mary were married in a traditional ceremony. When the leaves turned gold that autumn, Singing Bird performed the ritual, binding their hands with blessed cord, speaking the ancient words that made them one before the eyes of the spirits and the community. You have chosen a difficult path, Singing Bird told them as she tied the final knot. Love between different worlds always requires extra courage, extra commitment. But the spirits smile on unions that bring people together rather than driving them apart. Their wedding night was spent under the vast prairie sky in a tipi decorated with symbols of love and protection. As Mary lay in Joseph's arms, listening to the night sounds of the camp around them, she felt complete for the first time in her life. Do you ever regret it? Joseph asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Leaving everything you knew? Never, Mary replied. Without hesitation, I regret the pain it caused Thomas, but I don't regret choosing love over duty, freedom over security. Even when the other women whisper about the white woman who stole one of their warriors, Mary smiled in the darkness. Even then. Come around eventually, most of them already have. And it was true. Mary's gentle nature, her willingness to learn, and her obvious devotion to Joseph had won over most of the tribe. She had proven herself through actions rather than words, working alongside the other women during the difficult winter months, caring for the sick, contributing her own skills to the community's well-being. But their happiness was not without its shadows. The world outside their prairie sanctuary was changing rapidly. More white settlers were moving west. The government was implementing new policies regarding native peoples. Tensions were rising throughout the territory. Chapter 13. Storms. On the horizon 3 years after Mary and Emma had joined the tribe, troubling news arrived with a group of traders who had long been friends to Joseph's people. The government was planning to move all native tribes to designated reservations, far from their traditional hunting grounds and sacred sites. They say it's for our own protection, reported the lead trader, a weathered man named Jake Carson, who had traded fairly with the tribes for over 2 decades. But I've seen these reservations. They're nothing but patches of worthless land where they expect you to scratch out a living farming dirt that won't grow weeds. As he listened to the report, he had always known this day might come, but knowing and experiencing were 2 different things. How long do we have? Asked the tribal chief, Joseph's uncle, a man named Running Bear. 6 months, maybe less. They're sending soldiers to escort any tribes that refuse to go voluntarily. That night, the tribal council met long into the night, debating their options. Some argued for resistance, others for negotiation, and still others for compliance with the government's demands. Joseph found himself in the difficult position of being caught between worlds. His love for Mary and Emma connected him to the white world in a way that others in the tribe couldn't fully understand, but his heart and soul belonged to his people and their traditional way of life. What do you think we should do? Running Bear asked him privately after the council meeting. I think we should survive, Joseph replied carefully. Our people have survived many changes over the generations. The question is how to survive this one while keeping our dignity and our identity intact. And your white wife? Will she come? With us to a reservation, Joseph felt his heart clench. He hadn't yet discussed this with Mary, but he knew the choice would be agonizing for her. Going to a reservation would mean leaving behind any remaining connection to her former life, subjecting Emma to even more hardship and uncertainty. That will be her choice to make, he said finally. When Joseph told Mary about the government's ultimatum, she was quiet for a long time, staring out across the prairie that had become her home. What do you want to do? She asked finally. Why, to stay here on the land of my fathers, living the way my people have always lived, Joseph replied honestly. But I also want to keep you and Emma safe. Those 2 desires may not be compatible. Mary took his hand, intertwining their fingers. We've faced impossible choices before. We'll face this one together too. But even as she spoke brave words, Mary felt fear creeping into her heart. She had found happiness and love, but the world seemed determined to test that love at every turn. Chapter 14. A mother's sacrifice. The answer to their dilemma came from an unexpected source. Thomas Sullivan arrived at the tribal camp on a cold November morning, alone and bearing news that would change everything. He looked older, Mary noticed, and there was a sadness in his eyes that spoke of lonely years and hard-won wisdom. There was also a strength there that hadn't been present before. A sense of a man who had learned to live with his choices and find peace and acceptance. Thomas, Mary said, surprise and caution warring in her voice. What brings you here? I've heard about the government's plans, he said without preamble. I've come to make you an offer. Joseph stepped up beside Mary, his body language protective but not hostile. Over the years, he had developed a grudging respect for the man, who had graciously stepped aside for love. What kind of offer? Joseph asked. Thomas looked directly at Emma, now 8 years old and beautiful. Her blonde hair braided in the native style, her blue eyes bright with intelligence and curiosity. Been thinking about what you said, Mary, about Emma being a bridge between worlds. Maybe that's exactly what she needs to be. But to do that effectively, she needs to understand both worlds completely. Mary felt her stomach drop, as she began to understand what Thomas was suggesting. "I'm not asking you to give her up," Thomas continued quickly, seeing the fear in Mary's eyes. "I'm asking you to let me help prepare her for the future. The world is changing, and Emma is going to need skills from both cultures to navigate it successfully." "What exactly are you proposing?" Mary asked carefully. "Let her come back with me for part of each year. Let her go to school in town, learn to read and write English fluently, understand the white world's ways of business and law. Then she can return to you and Joseph for the rest of the year, maintaining her connection to this life and these people." Emma looked between her parents, understanding that something important was being discussed but not grasping the full implications. She would learn both worlds, Joseph mused thoughtfully. She could serve as a translator, a negotiator, someone who could help her people deal with the changing times. "But she's so young," Mary protested, her maternal instincts rebelling against any plan that would separate her from her daughter. "She's 8, Thomas replied gently. "The same age you were when your parents sent you to live with your aunt in town so you could attend school. You told me once that those years, difficult as they were, gave you skills and perspectives you couldn't have gained any other way." Mary remembered those conversations, shared during the early days of their marriage, when they had still talked to each other about their childhood dreams and fears. Emma stepped forward, her young voice clear and confident. "What kind of school? Would I go to Papa Thomas?" "Okay." The name hit Thomas like a physical blow. She still remembered him, still acknowledged their connection, even after years of separation. "A good school," he managed to say, "where you would learn to read and write, study mathematics and history, maybe even learn to play the piano." Emma's eyes lit up with curiosity. She had always been drawn to learning, absorbing knowledge from both cultures with equal enthusiasm. "I could come back here in the summers," she asked. "Every summer," Thomas promised. "For winters too, if you wanted. The choice would always be yours." Mary felt torn between her desire to keep Emma close and her recognition that Thomas's plan might truly be in Emma's best interests. The reservation system would limit Emma's opportunities severely, but living part-time in both worlds could prepare her to help her people in ways that would be impossible otherwise. Chapter 15. The ultimate test. That night, Mary and Joseph talked long into the night, weighing the impossible choice before them. "It could work," Joseph said thoughtfully. "Emma could learn the white man's laws, his business practices, his education system. When she's grown, she could advocate for our people, help us navigate the new world we're being forced into." "But she's my baby," Mary whispered, tears flowing freely down her cheeks. "I've already lost one life, one world. Now I'm being asked to give up half of my time with my daughter too." Joseph gathered her into his arms, his own heart breaking at her pain. "Love sometimes means letting go," he said softly. "You taught me that when you left Thomas. Sometimes the greatest act of love is giving someone the freedom to become who they're meant to be. But what if she chooses his world over ours? What if she decides she prefers the comfort and security of town life?" "Then we'll love her anyway," Joseph replied simply. "And we'll trust that the values we've taught her, the love we've shown her, will guide her to make choices that honor both sides of her heritage." The next morning, Mary sat down with Emma for a conversation that felt like the hardest thing she had ever done. "Sweetheart, Papa Thomas has offered to let you come stay with him during the school months, so you can learn reading and writing and all the things children learn in the white schools. What do you think about that?" Emma was quiet for a moment, her young mind processing the implications. "Would I still be your daughter?" she asked finally. "Always and forever," Mary assured her. "Nothing could ever change that." "And I could still come back here to be with you and Papa Joseph, every summer and whenever else you wanted to visit?" Emma nodded slowly. I think I would like to try it. The other children here have taught me so much about our ways. Maybe I can learn the white ways too, and then I can help both peoples understand each other better." Mary felt her heart swell with pride even as it broke with impending loss. Her daughter, at 8 years old, was already thinking like the bridge between worlds that Joseph had always said she was meant to be. "Are you sure, Emma? It will be hard sometimes, living in 2 different places, following different rules." "Mama," Emma said, with the wisdom that sometimes emerges from the mouths of children, "you chose to live in two worlds when you came here. You chose love even when it was hard. I want to make that same kind of brave choice." Chapter 16, Bittersweet. Partings. The day of Emma's departure was crisp and clear, with the kind of autumn light that makes everything look golden and precious. Mary had spent the morning helping Emma pack her few belongings, including both of her dolls, the carved wooden one that had started it all, the beaded one that represented her adopted family's love. The entire tribe gathered to see Emma off, showering her with small gifts and blessings for her journey. Singing Bird placed a special amulet around Emma's neck, a small pouch containing sacred herbs and stones that would protect her and remind her of her connection to her adopted people. "You carry our hearts with you, little bridge builder," the old woman said, her voice thick with emotion. "Remember who you are, no matter where you go or what you learn." Joseph lifted Emma onto Thomas's wagon, his strong hands gentle as he settled her among the blankets and supplies Thomas had brought for the journey. "Be brave, little warrior," he told her. "Learn everything you can, but never forget that wisdom. It comes from the heart as much as from books." "I won't forget, Papa Joseph," Emma promised, using the name she had given him years ago. "I'll write you letters, and I'll tell everyone at school about my family here." Mary climbed up into the wagon for one last embrace, holding her daughter close and breathing in the scent of her hair, trying to memorize everything about this moment. "I love you beyond the stars and back again," she whispered, the phrase she had used every night at bedtime since Emma was a baby. "I love you beyond the stars and back again too, Mama," Emma replied, their special ritual providing comfort even in this moment of separation. As the wagon rolled away, Mary stood between Joseph and Singing Bird, watching until it disappeared over the hill. Only then did she allow herself to break down.